my talk would basically cover the review of literature assessing the prevalence of osteopenia in girls with Rett syndrome, and understanding the pathophysiology which is responsible for decreased bone strength in individuals with Rett syndrome, and mostly what we can do to optimize bone strength at young age in our girls with Rett. So just going through the general definition which was come up in an NIH consensus conference on osteoporosis in 2000. So osteoporosis is defined as a skeletal disorder characterized by compromised bone strength that predisposes to an increased risk of fracture. But from our clinician's point of view, osteoporosis is defined in terms of the DEXA scan value, which is form of an advanced form of an X-ray, and osteopenia is an earlier stage of osteoporosis, which is defined as a bone DEXA value between 0 and minus 1.5 standard deviation below the mean, while osteoporosis is defined as a bone DEXA value less than minus 2.5 standard deviation below the mean. But from all practical purposes, if any individual sustains a fragility fracture, which means a low trauma fracture, he comes into the category of osteoporosis irrespective of their bone mineral density. So there are different ways of assessing bone mineral density. Can it be assessed in a general X-ray? Yes, it can, but it really takes a long time before the changes will be apparent on a plain X-ray film. And it is said that you have to reduce your bone mineral density by approximately 30 to 40% before you can see it on a plain X-ray. So you do not really want to wait for that long, and hence people came up with a better means of imaging, and the gold standard nowadays for measuring bone mineral density is the DEXA scan. So DEXA scan is is a form of a densitometry scan. In pediatric population, it is dependent upon age, weight, height, as well as the pubertal status. Hence, its interpretation definitely requires an expert for interpreting in terms of the pediatric population. So this is what the DEXA machine looks like, and it provides a two-dimensional imaging of a region of a bone. And the major bones which are assessed for DEXA scans are the lumbar spine, hip, and radius. And DEXA provides a computerized printout of the bone calcium content, which is measured in grams, and the bone area is measured in centimeters square, and the two-dimensional bone density is measured as grams per centimeter square. DEXA is considered the gold standard, however, it's still associated with certain pitfalls. As I mentioned, it gives you the areal density and not the volumetric density, so it sometimes is not able to tell you the exact changes in the bone strength. Again, it's a measure of the area, so sometimes it overreads in children with bigger stature compared to the children who are small stature, who might be having the same amount of bone mineral density. And from our point of view, it's a little difficult to do in all girls with Rett syndrome because most of the girls will have these abnormal movements, and it's difficult to interpret the data unless they're lying still. We can still do it, but it has to be done under sedation. So just trying to understand what are the factors which are contributing to the bone strength. So besides bone mineral density, the bone quality in itself plays an important role in deciding the bone strength. And the various factors which decide the bone quality are the bone turnover, the microarchitecture of the bone, the mineralization status of the bone, as well as the general bone geometry. So in all individuals, our bone is constantly getting remodeled, meaning thereby that the old worn out bone is being removed by the bone resorbing cells called the osteoclasts, while the new bone is consistently being formed by the bone forming cells called the osteoblasts. So there is a continuous balance between the amount of bone that is being formed and the amount of bone that is being resorbed. The pediatric population is unique in the sense that the bone formation is much higher compared to the bone resorption, so that the peak bone mass, which ultimately decides your bone mineral density as an adult, happens during the stages of puberty, when you are growing, having your puberty. That is the early adolescent year where you attain the maximum peak bone mass. So if for some reason that peak bone mass is not attained, you are much higher risk of developing osteoporosis as an adult. So the process of osteoporosis is basically starting in the pediatric age group. So low bone mineral density in children involves net loss of bone, and it basically happens due to imbalance between the rate of bone formation and the rate of bone resorption. So what are the risk factors which predispose you to developing osteoporosis? So as I already mentioned, the mineralization is an important part of bone quality. So you have to have adequate minerals in your diet for the good mineralization to occur. So if the diet is low in calcium, or if the child has poor nutrition or poor general health, interfering with taking nutrients or assimilating it once they are taken, then they would land up with a weaker bones. Similarly, the conditions which lead to chronic inflammation. So the chronic inflammation doesn't only interferes with the intake, but it also causes release of certain chemicals which causes premature death of your bone forming cells. So this is another condition which can predispose you to develop poor bones. The next most important factor that I consider is the immobility. So number of studies have been done to show that the muscle strength also decides your bone strength. So if for some reason the child is not ambulatory, they not only lose calcium from the bones, but they also tend to have a weaker muscles which interferes with the strength of the bone as well. Since I'm an endocrinologist, I have to talk about the hormones. So there are certain hormonal imbalance conditions which also interferes with bone mineralization and bone strength, and the two most important ones are the hyperthyroidism and the hyperparathyroidism. Both of these conditions interfere with mineral accretion in the bone. So those are the things that you have to watch for. Again, vitamin D is crucial for calcium absorption, and hence vitamin D deficiency would interfere with bone mineralization. And then last but not the least, there are certain medications which increases your risk of osteoporosis, and the two important groups are the seizure medications and the oral steroids, both of which interferes with vitamin D absorption and hence its effect on calcium absorption. So now coming over to individuals with Rett syndromes, in a number of studies it has been shown that individuals with Rett syndromes show signs of osteoporosis at a very young age. So in a national multinational study assessing the risk of fractures, what they found was while the annual fracture rate in healthy girls 6 years and older is 3 per 100% year, the girls with spastic quadriplegia, which were neuromuscularly in par with the girls with Rett syndrome, the annual fracture risk was 2.7 per 100% year, while the girls with Rett syndrome was much higher, coming up to 3.6 per 100% year. So I went through all the research studies which have been done in the past, and I have put forward just a couple of them which have shown the bone strength is compromised in individuals with Rett syndrome. So this one was an Australian study done by the Leonard H. et al., where they looked at the X-rays of girls with Rett syndrome versus the girls of the similar age control girls. And what they found was that the girls with Rett, so they studied 94 Rett syndrome girls and compared it with the age control girls. And what they found was that the Rett syndrome girls all tend to have short fourth metatarsal and ulna, which was seen in more than 50% of the girls who were more than 5 years of age. Also, the fourth metacarpal was twice as common in Rett syndrome girls as compared to the controls, and they also noticed that these girls were showing earlier maturation compared to the controls. So now looking into the geometry of the bone, what they found was that the 80% had cortical thinning, of which 1/4 had severe cortical thinning.